I know some of you are there already. I can see the chat. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's, shall we say, welcome to church. I've been waiting to call them. At least we have to call it a name. Maybe I should have come in like 5 minutes earlier because this week is looking very, 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 very packed. It's probably going to be one of my longest sermon. I need some indication that you guys can see and hear me clearly. Okay, so I see Ifeanyi. Good morning too. May God bless you all. All right, so Ifeanyi, you probably have to wait until when the Yoruba section would have been translated for some of you to get the message from that section. But for my Yoruba language speaking audience, Abosede, I see you. So I'm going to start with the Yoruba language section. For the benefit of those of you who don't speak Yoruba, we'll try our best to provide a transcript in Yoruba by sometime during the course of the week. So here we go. Ẹ káàbọ̀ sórí ètò tó wà lé ní ẹ̀yin èèyàn wa nílé lóko ibi òwú tẹ́ ẹ bá wà lórílẹ̀‐èdè yìí tàbí níbi tí ọmọ káàárọ̀ òjíire dé ní gbogbo ilé ayé níbi tí wọ́n fọ́n wa dé káàkiri bí ẹyẹ ẹ káàárọ̀ ńbẹ̀. Olúwa Ọlọ́run ọba yóò máa wà pẹ̀lú gbogbo wa. A kú ọ̀sẹ̀ tuntun. Ọ̀tọ̀ ni tí mo tiẹ̀ ti pé mo fẹ́ bá yín sọ láàárọ̀ ìtẹ́lẹ̀ àmọ́ bí mo ṣe wá ń ka mo ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní máa kọ́ ifá àbẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní olúwẹ̀ dàdàgbà jẹ́rà òfù kiri ó ní mí ṣùgbọ́n gbogbo ohun tó ń pè ní pé wọ́n fi ìmọ̀ pamọ́ fún wa inú ìmọ̀ wa náà ló wà. So ẹ bá wo àwọn àṣà àti ìṣe wa à ń bẹ̀rẹ̀ látòrí òwe ẹ ń bá wa gbọ́n tọ́lọ́run tètè kọ́ lọ́gbọ́n tó rí àwọn ìwé tó rà láwọn ìwé nísìnyí tó ń kọ́ wa ní ifá ń kọ́ wa láwọn àṣà wa. Mò ń kà kan lọ́wọ́ ń bẹ̀ mo wá ń lọ láàárọ̀ yìí mo wá bá ẹsẹ̀ ifá kan pàdé. Òun kọ́ ni mo ní lọ́kàn láti fi sọ̀rọ̀ lónìí tẹ́lẹ̀ ṣùgbọ́n gbà mo bá ẹsẹ̀ ifá yìí pàdé mo rí i pé mo gbọ́dọ̀ bá yín fi sọ̀rọ̀. Ẹ mọ kí ló ti wí? Wọ́n ń pè ní Ògúndádì òun ló du fátà ń wí. Ó ní òfurufú kò ṣeé fẹ̀yìntì àdífá fọ́rùnmìlà tí ó ṣọkọ wúrà ọlá ẹ̀là ifá tọkọ wúrà ṣe babaláwo tó gbọ́fá àbí wúrà níkùn. Mo mọ̀ pé even ẹ̀yin tẹ́ ẹ jọ ọmọ Yorùbá gan-an ó lè kọ yín létí díẹ̀ ṣùgbọ́n n tó ń wí kò pọ̀ n tó ń sọ náà rèé ṣe rí Ọ̀rúnmìlà ni ó lóun fẹ́ ṣe ọkọ wúrà ọlá. Wọ́n á ní ṣó tọkọ wúrà ọlá ṣe wọ́n ní babaláwo tó gbọ́fá àbí wúrà níkùn. Ṣé Ọ̀rúnmìlà gbé wúrà mi ni? Láti ìgbà náà ló fi jẹ́ pé wọ́n ní babaláwo tó gbọ́fá àbí wúrà níkùn. Ṣùgbọ́n báwo ló ṣe so mọ́ ọ̀rọ̀ tí mo fẹ́ bá yín sọ lénìí ẹ jẹ́ n sọ fún yín. Ṣé rí tí àwọn tó ń ṣe adarí ìlú táwọn fúnrara wọn tó bá jẹ́ elébi tí babaláwo bá jẹ́ elébi àti tí wọn ò pè sí ni ó mọ̀ yọmú sí. Ibi tó yẹ kó ti lè sòótọ́ òótọ́ ò ní ṣe é sọ ń bẹ̀ nítorí ìjẹkújẹ tí ó jẹ babaláwo tó gbọ́fá àbí wúrà níkùn. Àwọn tá a wá mú tá a fi ṣolórí lọ́tún tá a fi ṣolórí lósì lórílẹ̀‐èdè wa látòrí lọ́balọ́ba dé àwọn ìjòyè mélòó nú wọn gangan la lè pè ní babaláwo tó gbọ́fá àbí wúrà níkùn? Mélòó nínú wọn la lè pè bẹ́ẹ̀? Ṣé rí ọ̀rọ̀ tó wà ńlẹ̀ yìí ní tí mo fi sọ rèé. Ṣé rí nígbà tí àwa wà léwe díẹ̀ to be specific ní 1999 nígbà tí democracy wa yìí quote and unquote tí ó bẹ̀rẹ̀ àwọn èèyàn bíi Chief Bọ́lá Ìgè wọ́n bá rò àwa ẹ̀ sọ̀rọ̀ pé àyè náà wá sí politics. Mo rántí pé mo sọ fún Babánjọ́ náà lọ́hùn pé ẹni tí ò lówó kì í sin ajá bó bá sin ajá òun ni ó pàjá òun jẹ. Nígbà tí ẹ bá ní kí n súnmọ́ politics tí mi ò níṣẹ́ lápamọ́ ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ń jáde ń law school ǹjẹ́ ẹ mọ̀ pé ń bá gbarú iṣẹ́ bẹ́ẹ̀ ní tí wọ́n bá sọ fún un ni ó máa ṣe bàbá wí bàbá sọ pé kò lè lẹ́nu àti sọ̀rọ̀ ní tí ẹsẹ̀ Ifá yẹn tó dìmú nìyẹn. Babaláwo tó gbọ́fá abiwúrà níkùn. Ẹ yéé mú àwọn tí ò níṣẹ́ lápá fi ṣolórí yín. Bẹ́ẹ̀ bá fi wọ́n ṣolórí, ẹ̀yin ni wọ́n máa mú sìn. Ibi tọ́rọ̀ tí mò ń sọ, ibi tó ń dá lọ nìyẹn. Ẹ yéé mú àwọn babaláwo tí ò gbọ́fá, tí ò sí wúrà níkùn wọn, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n ṣolórí ìjọ, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n ṣolórí mọ́ṣáláṣí, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n jọba, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n ṣe kánsẹ́lọ̀, ẹ yéé fi irúfẹ́ wọn, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n ṣe chairman local government yín, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n ṣe gómìnà, ẹ yéé fi wọ́n jolórí ìlú. Ó ṣe jẹ́ wípé àwọn táwa fúnra wa ò lè gbà síṣẹ́ ká fi ṣe olórí ilé adìyẹ la fi ń ṣe local government chairman. Nígbà wo la dì bẹ́ẹ̀? Nígbà wo? Kí ló sọ wá dì bẹ́ẹ̀? Bẹ́ẹ̀ bá sì gbẹ́sẹ̀ Ifá yẹn, ó ní nǹkan kan tán bàbá wa tún máa wí. Wọ́n ní ó ní ń tágbàlagbà jẹ tẹ́lẹ̀ ẹkùn kó tó sọ pé bí yóò. Àbẹ́ ẹ̀ gbọ́ mi ni? Ó ní ń tí àgbàlagbà tó jẹ tẹ́lẹ̀ ẹkùn kó tó lé bí yóò. Àgbàlagbà ò ní jẹ̀jẹkújẹ tó bá dé di òótọ́ á sọ ìtójú òótọ́. Wọ́n bá ní gba kínní kó lè má sọ ọmọ á lóun ti yó, ẹ má wọrí, ẹ fílẹ̀, ó wà ọ̀rá ìtì. Ṣùgbọ́n ta la fẹ́ rí nínú àwọn tá a pè lólórí? Bóyá nínú ìjọ ni, bóyá nínú ilé ni, bóyá láàrin ìlú ni, bóyá nínú ìjọba ìbílẹ̀ ni, ta la pè nínú wọn tó jẹ́ pé tí wọ́n bá fi sílè kan gún wọn lẹ́nu, ẹnu wọn ò ní tì. Ẹ bira yín léèrè. So tá a bá wà níbi tá a wà lénìí, tó jẹ́ pé dípò ká bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní sọ̀rọ̀ lórí kí ni ìjọba ń ṣe fáráàlú, kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀ sétò ẹ̀kọ́, kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀ sétò ìwòsàn, báwo ló ṣe ṣẹlẹ̀ sí títí ò sí mọ́ ìlú, àṣedébi tó jẹ́ pé gbogbo àwọn ìletò wa kéréje kéréje ó ti ń dahoro torí àwọn èèyàn ń sá kán má bàa gbé wọn pa, kí kidnapper má bàa mú wọn. Ọba àti ìjòyè gan ti sá kúrò láwọn ìletò kan. Àwọn tí ò tiẹ̀ jẹ́ pé kidnapper ń gbé káàkiri nígbà tí ò bá sílé ìwé gidi fáwọn ọmọ ṣé wọn ò ní kúrò ńbẹ̀. Nígbà tó bá jẹ́ pé alágbo tí ò sí mọ́ nìkan ló lè tọ́jú ìyá tó fẹ́ bímọ, báwo ni wọn ò ṣe ní kúrò ńbẹ̀? Ibi tá a wà, mo ní ń bá yín wí. Ẹ yéé fi elébi délé. Kò sí bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe lè mélébi tí ò ní jalè. Wèrè wo ni wọ́n ó fún lọ́kọ́ tí ò ní roko sọ́dọ̀ ààrẹ? Nígbà tẹ́yin fúnra yín rí, èèyàn wá bá yín ó ní ẹ gbowó, ẹ dìbò fún mi o. Ṣé bò tẹ́ ẹ ti tà tó fún yín lẹ́nu ọ̀rọ̀ láti béèrè wọ́n ṣe é rí bí wọn ò ṣe é rí? Èmi ò rí jù báyìí lọ láàárọ̀ yìí o. Ìyẹn ò fẹ́yìn tèmi tá a jọ ń gbọ́ra wa ní Káàárọ̀ Oòjíire. Ẹ̀yin tẹ́ ẹ sì padà gbọ́ náà lédè òyìnbó nígbà tí wọ́n bàbá yín fi caption sí. Ẹ mú kẹ́ yẹ̀ wò lọ́dọ̀ yín náà torí kò sí ní tó fi yàtọ̀ síra wọn. Nǹkan kan náà bó ṣe wà ní kíni náà, bó ṣe wà léwùrà, bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ń bẹ ní. Kò sí nǹkan tó ń bẹ lákọ̀ọ́ṣù. Kò sí bó ṣe wà lọ́dọ̀ wa ń bí tí ò sí nílẹ̀ Ìgbò, tí ò sí nílẹ̀ Haúsá. Kò síbi tí kankan fi yàtọ̀ síra wọn. Àìsàn tó ń ṣe kíni náà ni. Àìsàn tí ń ṣẹgbẹ̀fà ní ṣọdún, ìtò ń ṣàbọ́yadé gbogbo ọlọ́ya ló ń ṣe. Eléyìí ló yẹ kó fi jẹ́ pé ká mọ̀ láì léèyàn tó ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ máa sọ fún wa. Ó yẹ ká mọ̀ eléyìí tó jẹ́tọ́ tó yẹ ká ṣe. Eléyìí ni kẹ́ ẹ jẹ́ ká gbájúmọ̀. Kò jù bẹ́ẹ̀ lọ o. Ire o. Ọ̀sẹ̀ tó ń bọ̀ ó san wá o. Ọlọ́run ní já bọ́ sọ́wọ́ àwọn agbénipa lọ́tùn lósì o. Ọlọ́run kó máa fi ṣọ́ ẹ̀, kó máa fi ṣọ́ gbogbo wa. Àní ṣíṣe o. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the way I've operated in recent times, what I've tried to do is, there's practically nothing I'm saying in English language that you haven't heard before. I might provide you a new vista into the issue, but we have a whole cacophony going on. We've been speaking in this, our own echo chamber, for a while. But there are vast majority of Nigerians who don't speak the wawawa that me and you can speak to each other the Dogon Turenchi that we speak. They don't speak it. And we speak over their heads constantly. And there is the arrogance of foolish knowledge. We sit down in our middle class bubbles and we believe that we can communicate with people to whom we have failed to be related. So this is what has informed the decision that I will spend the first 10 minutes of my broadcast. That's why I start at 9:50. I might be starting at 9:45 in the future to allow me a little more time to introduce the subject and to explain to the non-Yoruba speaking audience what the intent is, because I saw a few people that were raising questions about, oh, how come we're on a live broadcast where we can't even speak the language? So now, welcome to the English language section, the destructive section, because that is what I believe the English language to be. It has destroyed our culture. We've lost our languages, and the language is the actual vehicle for socialization. So the more you lose your indigenous language, the more we lose the opportunity to walk back. But I wouldn't bore you with too much of that this morning. I picked for myself a subject this morning, the idea of citizenship in the Feudal Republic of Nigeria. Long title. But it is born again from one of the quotes. I gave a quote by Buckminster Fuller in my last lecture, where he explained very carefully that you do not change a reality by railing against it. You change it by constructing a new reality that renders the one you do not want obsolete. And for a while, and I've spoken to these extensively in my interventions over the years, I wrote an entire book on it, and that's the one that I titled The Imperative of the Nigerian Revolution. I've made clear over the years that the only antidote to the madness that we have become enmeshed in is citizenship. And as simple as that concept might sound to a lot of you, the reality is that it is a misunderstanding of that concept that has brought us to the sorry paths in which we are today. So I'm going to take a bit of time. You are going to humor me. I usually try my best to ensure that my entire session does not last beyond 45 minutes at the most. That is something I have done for years. But I am going to probably run beyond 45 minutes today, and I'm asking you to please bear with me. It is critical that we understand ourselves, that even if we may disagree on conclusions, we must not disagree or be arguing about facts. Now, when I speak about the idea of citizenship in the Feudal Republic of Nigeria, I believe there are two key words that we need to unbundle in order to understand the entirety of the sermon. I like riling my fundamentalist pastor friends. So this sermon today will be focused on this subject, but there are two concepts that must be clearly understood by all. The first is citizenship. The second is feudal. Now, I have, like I said, written a book on the subject, spent God knows how many hours giving lectures on the subject, but the more I look to the past, the more convinced I am that this is the sole antidote to our problems. So let me start. What is citizenship? Exactly, because Nigeria is a place where words travel to acquire new meanings. And its acquisition of new meanings have become part of the process of acculturation to madness, and we cannot continue to be acculturated to insanity. So let's begin. What is citizenship? Now, to understand citizenship, and in order not to make these too lengthy, let me break it down. In ancient Rome, I'm going to start with them, but that is without prejudice to the fact that we had evolved citizenship before there was any idea of citizenship in European thoughts. So they had this idea that if you're wealthy, if you're privileged, if you've served in the military, Citizenship was a concept that wasn't available to all within the society. It was available to select few. And it wasn't just about it being a feudalized system. It was just a simple fact of existence that there were those up there and there were some down here. So you can now begin to have the multiple constructs by which you explain that in medieval or ancient Europe. So in Greek time, in Greek and Roman time, you had a privileged few who were considered citizens. And then you had the different other layers beneath them. So when we speak of citizenship at its origin, it wasn't a function of it wasn't something that was readily available to everybody. And you could have, for those of you who are probably missing church this morning, but you are always wedded to your Bible, you may want to look at Acts of Apostle, particularly, I believe, chapter 22, from verses 22 to 23. You will find the place where Paul was making it very clear that he couldn't be flogged because he was a Roman citizen. And being a Roman citizen meant that he was excluded from crucifixion, he was excluded from public flogging without trial. He could not be crucified or have his life taken from him without trial. He had the right to appeal to Caesar before his life may be taken. That was the privilege of citizenship, even though he was of Jewish origin. But he had Roman citizenship. If you look at Acts of Apostles, chapter 25, verses 10 to 11, you see the part where he appealed to Caesar. And when they were about to flog him, both in Philippi, when he was with Silas, and when they were about to flog him in Jerusalem, he evoked, he brought forth his rights as a Roman citizen. And on account of this, he was exempted from the public flogging. They would not dare. He had the protection of the Roman Empire behind his being. So he was a citizen. That is the meaning of citizenship. The force of a state stood behind you to protect you as a being. It had demands. You had to pay tax. You had to serve in the military if you were called upon in times of war. In some cases, it was compulsory. You had to, like for instance, the Koreans, you have to compulsorily serve in the military, I believe, for a year. The same in Ukraine today. So when you are a citizen, it comes with privileges, but it also comes with rights. But that is European concept of citizenship. It was the Americans who came with their idea of the 14th Amendment to their Constitution that made citizenship a universal thing for everybody born within the geographical space known as America. So, or born of American parentage. There are multiple layers. So you have a situation where the idea of universal citizenship came about as a result of the egalitarian constitution of America. Even that was excluded to a very large extent for a long time to the blacks. So when you speak of citizenship, these are the roots in the Western construct. But let me bring you back home. Because like I said, one of the things that has happened to us is that we have had gold, diamonds taken away from us, and we've been given glass beads. Long before the ancestors of the British or the Americans came up with the idea of citizenship, it was intrinsic and part and parcel of my culture as a Yoruba man. In Yoruba culture, we evolved proverbs such as the one that says, Ba ṣe bí ẹrú, la ṣe bí ọmọ. There is equality between the freeborn and the enslaved. They even go further. They said, Dábàá bá ń ṣòfin nítorí ẹrú, ká rántí ọjọ́ tó fi hàn padà wá mọ́mọ́ joyè. When we make laws with the slave's child in mind, never forget the day when the law will come to ensnare the child of the prince. These were clear precepts and concepts in Yoruba language. No ruler had absolute power over anybody in Yoruba land. If anything, we had checks and balances that assured that the king is subject to the sovereign will of the people, even though he was the sovereign. Let us be clear that it did not require the white man to teach my own culture the concept of citizenship. Yorubas were citizens long before the British came to these shores, long before the Mohammedans came, because they preceded the British. We were freeborn. We were citizens. Our culture did not envisage a system where we were born to different classes and you could not rise above that class. We did not require the Magna Carta to become citizens. We were already citizens. We had the protection of the law because the word of the king was the law, and he had a duty to enforce the law. He had duties to ensure the safety of all within the empire or kingdom. And he had a duty to be equitable in his rulings. Even the court, the traditional courts, were governed by rules far beyond the contemplation of any Western civilization of the time. Equity ruled the land. The West might come with subjective interpretation of some of our practices, but it does not lie in their mouths. Long before they understood the concept of citizenship, we were citizens. So how did we get to where we are today, and what do I mean? Because it is now getting to that point where we need to now begin to unpack certain things. In creating the Nigerian state and declaring its inhabitants to be citizens, the British were being fraudulent, and the Africans were misled. We bought a monkey thinking it was a dog, and I would explain myself. When the British came to these shores, their sole interest was exploitation, and it remains the same till this day. But that did not happen overnight or happen by accident. It was a systemic thing. The first thing that happened when the British came to these shores was that they came as enslavers, and they came to enslave the people. And when they came first with the Bible, and they had their guns in tow. Elmina Castle is a beautiful idea of what transpired. The slave dungeons are on the ground floor. The chapels right on top of the holding pen, where human beings were traded like stock. Worse than stock, because they valued their horses and dogs higher than they valued the human cargo which are insured. Lloyd's of London, they insured human cargo, and so did every other insurer in the British cities that you walk through these days. But after they were done with enslavement that lasted centuries, because of the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the reality that the blacks would eventually outnumber them even in their own land, they put an end to what they call slavery, since they were not as brutal as the Arabs, who routinely castrated the blacks that they carted away as cargo. So they prevented a situation where their population was overrun by blacks. They routinely castrated black males, even as they happily slept with the females. So our history must not be forgotten. Our contact with both the Mohammedans and those we call the Christians, the West, is rooted in slavery. And when they were done with enslaving us, they moved to the next stage. They called it colonization, the maintenance of a slave plantation from where they extracted value. And when it became unsustainable, as every evil eventually becomes, they, they went back and they constructed a new one, and it's neocolonialism. But neocolonialism has its root in colonialism. And this is the point where we sometimes mix it up. And this is the part where I will now have to go and deal with the issue of the feudal republic that we have built. The feudal republic has its root in indirect rule. That is the British euphemism for getting the slaves to oversee the plantation. In Western Nigeria, they had the Obas to contend with because the Obas were the points through which they began to rule. In the East, the Igbos do not make kings. Kwano, they created warrant chiefs for you guys. And you pretty much have domesticated them now because everywhere I see is a this of autonomous this, is a that, is a this. Creation of colonialism. But in the North, they found ready-made cousins. Two Islamic republics existed in northern Nigeria. The first is the Kanem Borno Empire. The second is the Fulani Caliphate, the Sokoto Caliphate. Now, both were highly systemized feudal system that largely mirrors the reality of our British colonizers. Remember that Britain came through a process of feudal state to emerge slowly into what is today referred to as a constitutional monarchy. A constitutional monarchy is essentially, really, without the Magna Carta, all you have is a feudal system. It is the Magna Carta that devolved power away from the king and limited his capacity to rule as an absolute monarch. The idea of an absolute monarch was unknown to southern Nigeria. Regardless of how extreme our rulers were, there were limitations on their powers. And in northern Nigeria, where you had feudalism reigning, it only reigned in a few parts. The Sokoto Caliphate and the Kanem Borno Empire. But the British came. Just as they created obese and all kind of Ezes in eastern Nigeria, warrant chiefs of all sorts, they subjugated tribes and ethnic groups that were not under the direct rule of the Fulanis, people the Fulanis used to treat as slave stock, today's Middle Belt, those they couldn't conquer, those they deliberately left unconquered so that they could continue to trade as slaves. They subjugated them and brought them under Fulani rulership or under the Kanem Borno Empire. And this systemized feudalism in northern Nigeria. Now, at the dawn of what comes to be known as Nigeria, there were contending arguments as to how this was to evolve. And one of the reasons why Nigeria came to be was the agreement that it should be a federal republic. Federal, meaning that these disparate people will govern themselves in their regions, grow at their own pace, based on their own culture, based on their worldview, and eventually they will have a federal government where common issues such as currency, foreign affairs, the army, not even the police was truly Nigerian, it was devolved. You had native authority police. That was the concept by which Nigeria was built. It was not found on citizenship. It was found on a people lumped together who had very little understanding of the Western concept of citizenship and who are lumped into a union where there have been anything but peace, simply because today, what once belonged in a part, a virus has jumped host. Why is the concept of feudalism has its root in Islamic empires that were in northern Nigeria, particularly in Fulani culture? It has jumped host. And let me break it down for you. How? When I say the feudal republic, let me explain. One, you cannot have citizenship in a space that is not governed by law. It is impossible. Feudalism has no room for citizens or the rule of law. And that is why when you look across Nigeria today, the easiest way to understand it is to view your governors as emirs. They are above the law. Your state houses of assembly, consider them to be the emirs and Kali council. They cannot speak above the emir. The emir dictates largely. The courts, the emir is the law. He has the ultimate authority. He is the grandest of the cadis. He appoints the cadi. That is what Nigeria has become. Your states have become as emirates. And your president is no different from the sultan. So in place of a president, you have a sultan. In place of governors, you have emirs. In place of a judiciary, because here is the point. If you say that the judiciary is the last hope of the common man, and even persons who have been heads of this country that we call Nigeria have come out into the public space and they have declared unequivocally the Nigerian judiciary is useless. If the judiciary is useless, it simply means that the citizens, quote and unquote, do not have the protection of law. So here is the point. If we have built a feudal system that discountenances the right of the people who live in the space, how can you call those people citizens when in reality they are victims? So when I say that I am a victim of Nigeria, I do not speak emotionally. I speak to the reality of our existence. Let me be clear. Feudalism exists on the acceptable non-equality of residents of a state. Accepted non-equality. If we are saying that this is the situation with our country, but we still say that these persons are ruled by these laws, it is possible to have an apartheid system such as they had in South Africa, where the discrimination is systemized, properly codified, and then it becomes easy for the victims to understand the commonalities of their affliction and then corporately fight against it. But unfortunately for us in Nigeria, we do not have a situation where the discriminations and the apartheid is properly documented, because it is difficult to document since it does not render itself amenable either to class or ethnic or even religious boundaries. Because even though they would use religion to normalize the madness and they will use ethnicity to justify the insanity, at the end of the day, the beneficiaries do not belong to one ethnic, religious, or even social class. The policeman who guards the governor, who orders the thug to kill someone are not members of an economic class that includes the governor, but they are the ones who execute the impunity. So they have access to the powers of impunity and they sustain the system of impunity, which is required for feudalism to thrive. But the victims continue to divide themselves when they fail to see that those who benefit from the feudal system of impunity that we have created are not divided on account, they are not divided on account of ethnicity. Umahi is Igbo, so is Ojiwuzo Kalu. Wike can pretend to be Ikwere from now till kingdom come. At the end of the day, he is an Igbo man. And yet, very few ethnic nations have been as marginalized as the Igbo. So even the Igbo must tell itself the truth. It must understand that its enemies are not the Yorubas. Its enemies are within the house. The enemies are everywhere. And if the Yoruba man must understand, let me quickly point something out to you. Kankara is in Katsina State. When Tinubu went to greet his predecessor's family, he didn't go to Katsina to see them. He wasn't in Daura. He was in Kaduna. Obamewa Igbamewa, 10 kings, 10 reign. Baba Tinubu's time will end as well. And then we will realize that actually we are as much victims as those that we have seen as enemies. The point I am making to you is simple. As much as they may seek to divide you along ethnic, religious, and social lines, the beneficiaries are undivided by those lines, but they require those divisions to be able to keep you where you are. And it is entirely up to you to understand that until you commonly decide to demand to be treated the same as every other person, which is the root of citizenship, this madness will not end. The only way to save Nigeria from itself is to ensure that citizenship emerges in this place. Outside of that, it will not happen. And Nigeria will die, and it will die with pain assured for each and every one of the victims that are lumped and tied up in its space. Let me be very clear. Without the rule of men, feudalism collapses. It cannot stand in the face of the rule of law. Feudalism is entirely dependent on men governing, on the supremacy of men's thoughts prevailing over set rules. Yoruba says, "Ìlú tí kò sí òfin, ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ kò sí níbẹ̀." A country or a space without rules do not have sins. That is the literal translation. But if you are familiar with Yoruba concepts, you will know that as a rule, what it's saying is that a place ungoverned by law becomes a place overtaken by abnormalities. That is what has happened to us. We're a place ungoverned by law, and that is why we cannot have citizens, because citizens require the protection of law. The law does not grant a power that it also does not delineate. If it gives you the power of arrest, it sets out the basis of arrest. If it gives you the power to stop a citizen, get that? Stop a citizen or even a resident. Because when we speak about citizenship, you are speaking to the highest level of the resident of a geographical space. Even visitors to a geographical space are demanding of the protection of their rights. When American citizens were kidnapped in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, I believe it was in Sokoto, somewhere in Sokoto, American special forces came into Nigeria to rescue their own.
That is the amount of value that they place on citizens. Who is the Nigerian citizen? Is it the same one that the police stops on the road? There is a video that even I saw a couple of weeks ago, and he was busy slapping a grown man, flogging him on the street because he was carrying a gun. How do you call that one a law enforcement officer? Nigeria is a place where we do not have citizens. It is critical, exceedingly critical, that we all understand very clearly that at the end of the day, if we all become citizens, we all enjoy the protection of the law, we can then have a democracy, a place that is not governed by impunity and overtaken by madness. That becomes only possible when we have a place that is governed by law. You can change government 1,001 times. Personnel changes will not solve the problem. This is not about changing who becomes the president of the country or the senators or even the reps. It's not about changing the judges or anything. It is at the end of the day about ensuring that we all become citizens where we can speak to ourselves honestly, forthrightly, understanding that what ails one ails all. There is a lot of poverty and private wealth. And that is what we have all pursued to the exclusion of others, not understanding that the only antidote to the feudal republic that we have created, this evil forest that we have built, the only way that we can walk away from it is to build a nation of citizens. Citizens are different from tribesmen. They are not the same as religious bigots. They are not the same as idiots. Citizens demand equality because he understands that if he is favored and another disfavored on account of any one of those reasons, be it religious or ethnic or class, when his own person is no longer there, the evil that he normalized will come back to visit him. I have tried my best to keep this as short as I can. And the centrality of citizenship to what must come, I've tried my best to explain. In the coming days, and I mean days, not weeks again, I'll be making a public call asking those of you who share the ideals that I have preached over the years to join us. If you recall, I am the National Organizing Secretary of Afenifere. Afenifere is simply another name for the Action Group. The Action Group is a left of center political party that has deep convictions about bringing together the Nigerian people as citizens. We'll be calling you to join us. The Yoruba name is Afenifere. You call it whatever you care in your own language. But as long as you want the good of all, we want you. We want you to join us. Let us pursue this together as one. We do not want anything for ourselves that we do not want for all. Again, I ask that you support the work that Randy Akapita is doing. Fantastic job. And I must not sign off this week without dealing with two issues very quickly. The first is what happened with Mama P and Abure. Abure, really? Shame on you. The only reason you became known is because a movement known as the Obedient Movement became part and parcel of 2023 cycle within the Labour Party. Whatever the differences might be that you may have with Mama P, how do you justify the brutalization? But again, you are just an apprentice when one compares your own role with that of Wike, is a second-hand houseboy, Larry Adeyinka, or whatever the heck that one calls his name, and what they've been doing, the DSS and Showore. It doesn't make sense. I've been looking at the Shore DSS Tango for the last week, and initially it seemed to me like, okay, it's the usual harassment, and Shore is more than capable of dealing with them. He's been at it for over 30 years. But a sinister chapter was opened when we began to hear about death threats. Let me be very clear. Nothing must happen to Omoyele Shore. Nothing. We have no guns. We can't match the state with violence. And in reality, everybody who opens their mouth in the Nigerian space to speak against the evil that has overtaken us, which the pastors, imams, and yesterday's men of conscience ignore now. When we speak these days, we're putting ourselves in harm's way. And very few people have done that in recent time as vociferously as Omoyele Sowore. So let me be clear. Ikú tó ń pa ojúgbà ẹni, òwe ńlá ló ń pa fún ni. What ails one, ails all. Anything untowards happens to Omoyele Sowore, let it be clear that we will hold the government of Bola Ahmed Tinubu responsible. The DSS has a constitutional duty to protect Nigerians, even though it mostly tells us to go and carry guns and be defending ourselves. And that came from no less than the current DG of the DSS. Let me be clear. If you are interested in flexing your muscles, go to Sambisa Forest. Go to Katsina, where terrorists are busy taking pictures, fully armed with kala, carrying rocket grenade launchers. If you had any shame, focus on those ones. Even MNK that you have locked up in your facility, like seriously, shame no dey catch on. You have all those terrorists in broad daylight attending press conferences, covered, no, and you cannot focus on those ones, but you are busy chasing Yeli around, you are busy threatening people up and down the place. Come on. When will you understand that the evil that you protect today will eventually consume you? You are Nigerians, as much victims of this system as those that you daily chase around and victimize. This is a joke carried too far, and it should end. I know see I'm past this one this week. Oh. This is where I'll let it go. See you next week. It is my prayer. Oh yeah, I'm going to be trying my best to do something for October 1st if I'm led to. But I'll see you all next week. Have a blessed week, everyone. Those to my Yoruba speaking audience, please do me a favor. The Yoruba videos, please, I beg you, help me share it amongst our people. Knowledge is important. Ignorance is always explained as darkness. If you read your Bible in Genesis, it says, the Spirit of the Lord brooded over the void and the darkness, and he said, let there be light. Light is knowledge. That is why in your Quran, you have Surat An-Nur.